Hi everyone! So today we're going to start learning Java. And the main difference between Java and a language like Python is that Java is object-oriented, meaning that any program that you write in Java needs to start with a class. And that main difference was the toughest thing for me when going from learning Python to learning Java. So that's where we're going to start today. And we're going to talk about objects and methods in Java. So let's start with an example of a circle object. So we have one circle and it has certain attributes. It has a center of 10, 20, it has a radius of 5, and it has a color of red. Then we have another circle that has a center of 40, 90, a radius of 20, and a color of green. Now, these two circles are different, but they each have the same attributes. They each have a center, they each have a radius, they each have a color. So because of this, we can write a circle class in Java that stores all of this information so that the code is repeatable. So, on top of attributes, objects can also have methods or actions that are tied to those objects. So for example, one action that a circle might have is to change its radius. Another action that a circle might have is to move horizontal, move vertical. So these are examples of what we call methods. So the attributes here turn into what we call instance variables or fields in a class. So if you had a class for circle objects, then its instance variables, so the variables that are tied to the class, would be something like center, radius, color. Then there's methods. Methods are the actions that circle objects do. So, for example, a method is kind of like a function. So the difference between the two are that functions can be called without an object attached to it, versus a method is a specific action, so it's a specific function that only works for a specific object. So for an object that is part of a class. So for example, change radius wouldn't work on a square. Right? A square object, because a square is not part of the circle class. Okay, so another thing that's great about Java, or really that's great about any object-oriented language, is that you can assign a variable name to an object. So for example, let's call this circle over here C1, and let's call this circle over here C2. So then when we want to reference the green circle, we would just say C2. And when we say C2, then the compiler knows that everything that's tied to that circle, C2, is stored there. So just some basics. Classes. So to identify a class, so for example, circle class, always use a capital letter to start. So I know that capital C, circle, is a class. Now, you can technically not do this, but anyone that is decent at writing Java code is going to follow these basic parameters. And then there's also methods and variables. Methods and variables should be all lowercase, or begin with lowercase, and then with every new word, it'll be uppercase. So that's called camel case, when you start with a lowercase, and then for the next word you have an uppercase, and so on. So change radius would be an example of a method name. Circle 1 is an example of a variable name. Now the only thing that is different for constant variables, so for example sales tax. Sales tax is always going to be 0.07, or at least for now. So you would name that with all caps. So instead of camel case, you would do sales _ tax, and it would be all caps. But otherwise, variables are lowercase. Java is case sensitive. So total is different than total, which is different than total. Total with a capital T, you would think is the name of a class, versus total with a lowercase t, you would assume is a variable name. Okay, so to make a new object in Java, you first need to start with a variable declaration. So a variable declaration just means that you are first starting with the type of variable it is. So back when we used Python, you could just say x equals 5, right? In Java, you can't do that. You have to tell me specifically what type of variable you want x to be. So in this case, C1 is the variable name, and circle with a capital C is the class name. So that means that C1 is of type circle. So it's a variable of type circle. Now, if we put square in the front there, then we would know it's of type square. If we put int in the front there, then we would know that that variable is an integer variable. So every variable must be declared in Java. Then you're going to use the equals operator to assign a specific object to that variable. And anytime you're making a new object, you must use the new operator. So the new operator must be used, and then you're going to use something called a constructor. So a constructor always has the exact same name as the class itself. So if our class is called circle, our constructor will be called circle. And the constructor is a special type of method that is used to create an object. So it's only called once when you're first creating the object, and that's called object instantiation. And what that does is when you call a constructor, so when you call a specific method that is the constructor, and you give it parameters, so for example, 10 is the center x value, 50 is the center y value, 20 is the radius, and red is the color. So here it takes 4 parameters. Then you can make a new circle object. All statements in Java must end with a semicolon. So if you are telling the computer anything, if you are making any statement whatsoever, then you must end it with a semicolon. You will forget these switching from Python to Java, and that's just natural. Parameters are the same thing as arguments. So in Java, a lot of times you'll call them parameters. In Python, a lot of times we call them arguments, but they're the same thing. They're things that go into the parentheses here, so into a method, that tell that method what these variables, these local variables, should be. Okay, so now, to call a method on an object, so just like calling a function, right, you can call a method. So you first start with the reference to the object. So most of the time, that's going to be the variable name for the object. So the circle's name is C1. Then you use a dot, and then you would say change color, which is the name of the method. Then you would give it a parameter. So in this case, I'm giving it a hexadecimal value for the color that I want it to be. Methods can have 1 parameter, they could have no parameters, they could have 10 parameters, just like functions, right? So you can have a function that takes multiple parameters or none at all. And that's how you would change the color of a specific circle object called C1. One other thing about Java that we'll get into later, but I just want you to know this so that when you see the starter code, you're not totally confused. A comment in Java starts with a // So a single line comment starts with 2 slashes and then you just type your comment. If you want a multi-line comment in Java, it's /* and then to close it, it's */. And then later on we'll talk a little bit more about Java doc API comments, but for now, just know the // is to make a comment, and you'll see that in the starter code. Okay, so now let's go into your assignment. So for your assignment today, you are going to first start by just reading over this first page, which is kind of just an overview of the video that I just went over, and there's just some helpful information here. So you're going to read over that, and then you're going to be drawing new objects and making new objects in a class. So the first thing I want to talk about is JavaDoc. So if you click here, it says read over the JavaDoc. So what you're going to start with is you are starting with a bunch of classes that I have already made for you. So these classes are already made. So for example, and don't click on Canvas because Canvas is kind of like two places removed from where you want to be. So I already drew the canvas for you. You don't have to worry about making a new canvas. But the rest of them, so circle, ellipse, isosceles triangle, person, rectangle, and square, each of these are going to be classes that you are going to be making objects from and then calling methods from. This is called JavaDoc. So JavaDoc is the API documentation that tells you all about a certain class and what its constructor is, what its methods are, and all that kind of stuff. So the first thing we're going to look at is circle. So in circle, notice it says, okay, it is an object and it's called circle. That's the class name. The first thing it talks about is the constructor summary. So the constructor for circle takes a center x, so the x value of its center, the y value of its center, the radius, and then where it says java.lang.string, that just means it wants a string parameter here, and it's the color. So valid colors are red, yellow, blue, green, magenta, black, or you can use hashtag and then your hex code for your RGB values. So you can make any color that way. And then once you make a circle and you call it something, then you can use any of these methods, any of them, on that circle object. So you can move it left, you can move it right, you can move it up, you can make it visible, invisible, you can erase the whole thing, change its size, all that kind of stuff. So these are what you're going to play around with in this project. And then same thing for ellipse. So ellipse has a center, it has a width, a height, and yeah, so you should just take a look at this and just read over the documentation so you understand what each of the object classes do. Next, you're going to click on the starter code. So when you click on the starter code, it's going to open up in Replit. And the only class that you are going to be working in is the main class. Almost every Java program has a main class. So the main class is just like the runner. It's what runs your code. Now, there's a whole bunch of other classes in this project. Notice there's canvas, circle, ellipse. You do not have to click on these and look at any of these because this is just all code that is written by myself and some other people. Okay, so you don't have to look at that at all. All you're going to be doing is working in the main. So this is where you're going to run all of your Java code. You can also just minimize that because you don't even need to look at the classes. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is in part 1, you're going to start by making some objects. Now, I already showed you how to make one object here, and what I did was I made a rectangle, and I called it background, and I just made it the entire size of the canvas. So this is just an example, and this rectangle is 700 pixels by 500 pixels. So now if you wanted to add, you're going to add at least one person and 5 other shapes. So, for example, say I wanted to add a circle. I can do circle, C1 equals new, don't forget the new operator, and then circle is the name of the class, which means it's also the name of its constructor. The circle, if we go back into our JavaDoc, we can see that it takes, constructor takes center X, center Y, radius, and color. So in here, we are going to type center X, so let's do 100, 100, so let's do it at 100, 100. Radius, let's do 30, and color, let's do red. Make sure you end with a semicolon. So when you run this, it might take a little while in Replit, and when you run it, it's going to draw a circle for you at 100, 100. Its radius is 30 and its color is red. And it's going to draw it on top of the rectangle that is blue. So here's my circle. Now notice 100, 100 here it's not down here. And that's because this is not 0, 0. This is 0, 0. So your values go positive is forward and positive is down. So this point here is 100, 100. This point here is 0, 0. Okay, so you're going to add a bunch of stuff in here. Then, for your animation part, you are going to add some things like move horizontal. So you could do like C1.move horizontal. And I want to move it horizontal 300 pixels. And so now when I run this, you'll see the circle drawn, and then you'll see it move. Okay, now, when you see it moves super fast. And that's because for the compiler, it does it so quickly that it's almost hard to even see with your eye. So instead of doing just move horizontal, you can also do move slow horizontal, which is another method in the circle class. So if you scroll down, you'll see it. Oh, slow move horizontal, not move slow horizontal. See, I'm glad I looked at the Java doc. So it's slow move horizontal. And then when we run that, we will see that the circle moves a lot slower, and you can actually see it move. So that's one that's cool, and it will actually make it look like the circle's kind of walking. And it's moving. Okay, and then the last part of this assignment is you are going to have a color change method. So you're going to change the color of all of the shapes. So right now I only have two shapes. I have background. So I'm going to change the color of my background to white. Don't forget the semicolon. And then for C1, which is my circle, I'm going to change my color to, let's do a hexadecimal value. So let's make it 0 red, full green, and a little bit, so like medium blue. So when we do that, make sure you put a hashtag in front too, or else it won't know that you are trying to give it a color. And so then when we run this, you're going to first see your circle being drawn. Then you're going to see your circle slowly move horizontal, and then you're going to see everything change color. Also, make sure that when you change your background color, you do that first, and then you change the circle's color. Otherwise, the circle will be underneath the background. So now we changed it, and there it is. Okay, and that's it. So have fun doing this. Your picture doesn't have to look like anything, but it would be cool if you did some kind of background, so like a person, and then like something in the background. So my example is like me standing in a room. You could have your person like standing outside with a tree or whatever. Just have fun with it.